Today is Thursday, and we are looking at Matthew chapter 10 today in our journey through the Gospels. You know, my dad, he was a car guy, and maybe you're a car guy. My father-in-law, he's a car guy, and I've known a lot of car guys throughout the year, and they're just guys that they just know cars, and they know details that maybe other people wouldn't know about cars. I remember growing up that one of the things that we always did every year was we would go to this big car show in Tulsa. And we would go there and we would walk around the cars. And I was always amazed as we walked around the cars that my dad, before we would get to the car, because if you've never been to a car show, every car, they always have a sign in the window or out in front of the car that tells you what year that the car is, and it'll tell you all the specs of the car, the motor and the transmission, and I mean, it gives you all that information. But it always amazed me that before we even got to that sign that my dad could say, you know, hey, that's a 55 Chevy two-door hardtop. And he could even tell you what motor or what motors were offered each year. And I mean, he could sometimes even tell you what color that the cars were offered in those years. And it just amazed me the details that he knew. And you know, I would look at from one car to the next and I would say, you know, well, that car looks the same as that car. How do you know the difference? And he'd say, well, in that year the headlights were this kind of headlights, but in that year it was this kind of headlights. And in that year the taillights were in this location and they were here. But in that car they're in a different place and everything. And so he knew all the little details of those cars. It just blew me away. It amazed me, but he was a car guy. He loved cars. I mean, from when he was growing up, he loved looking at cars. I mean, he would look through magazines and read about cars. He would study cars. He loved to work on cars. He knew all of those details about cars because he loved them a lot. But I want to look today in a passage of Matthew chapter 10, and I want to look about what God thinks about us. Did you know that God loves you and cares for you and knows every little detail about you? Listen to what Jesus says in Matthew 10, starting in verse 29. He says this, "Are not two sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from the will of your Father. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid, you are worth more than many sparrows." How much does God know about the birds? Well, he knows a lot. He created them. But it also says in that passage, Jesus says that even if one of those birds falls out of the sky, God knows about it. Now, I don't know how many birds fall out of the sky and how many birds die every day, but I'm sure around the world, I'm sure it's a lot of birds. And Jesus says, not one of those birds falls to the ground or dies without God knowing about it. But you know what? Jesus says that you are worth more to God even than birds. He says that you mean more to Him even than those birds that fall to the ground. And how do I know that? Well, Jesus gives a little detail. He says that He even knows the number of hairs that are on your head. How many is that? Now, for some people, it's not as many as it used to be when they were younger in their life. But one medical study said that you are born with 100,000 hair follicles. Now, but that's the average person. But it also is dependent upon your hair color type, your natural hair color type. If you were naturally a blonde when you were born, you have an average of 150,000 hair follicles. If you're a redhead, you have 90,000 hair follicles, and if you're a brown or black hair, it could be from 100 to 110,000 hair follicles. Now that's a lot of hairs to keep up with, and yet Jesus says that God knows the number of the hairs that are on your head. He knows every detail of your life, even that little detail He knows about you. That's how much God cares for you. Now, the context of this passage that Jesus is teaching, he's teaching his disciples, he's getting ready to send them out to do ministry, and he's basically warning them, saying, you are probably going to face some persecution, but there's no need for you to fear. There's no need for you to be afraid of what's going to happen. And Jesus says, so don't be afraid. You are worth more to God than many sparrows. He tells the disciples, hey, guys, God cares about you more than animals, and He knows every little detail of your life. That's how much He loves you. That's how much He cares for you. And the same thing, just as it was for the disciples, the same is for you. God loves you, and God cares for you that much. You mean that much to God. You mean that much. He knows your heart. He knows the number of the hairs that are on your head. He knows your hurts. He knows what you're going through. He loves you that much. Remember that as you go throughout today, that God loves and cares for you that much. That'll do it for today. Have a great Thursday, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow as we are in Matthew chapter 10. Have a great day.